Welcome everyone to yet another series on emergency. Today we are joined by Mr. Jagdeep Chhokar, whom we have all known as, with several things from a bird watcher to a citizen activist to a lawyer to a professor, trainer, researcher, you name it, he has everything on his resume. But yet, and most importantly, he's also one of the founders of Association for Democratic Reforms and has been fighting to, bring transparency and accountability and uphold the values of democracy. But I'd like to ask Mr. Jagdeep Chokarji to introduce yourself. What would you tell if you were to introduce? This is what we all, sort of write about you, speak about you, but how would you introduce yourself?
Well, nowadays I just introduce myself as an active citizen. I don't even like to call myself a citizen activist because the word activist has acquired a kind of a connotation which is uh, not very positive. So I am a citizen and I am concerned about what happens around me and in the country and also in the world in a way. So I am just a concerned citizen, if I may say so.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal that phrase from you and use it as an active citizen. I think that's the best way to introduce oneself. Uh,
Thank
so,
you.
thank you very much. See, already we are into 2 minutes and I've already learned something from you. Um, going back to the days of emergency, do you recall 21st June 1975? Uh, where were you? At what stage of your life you were? Anything that you still carry with you even after all these years?
I don't remember the date, 21st of June 1975, but what I do remember is that I was working with the railways at that time, one of the many phases of my working career. And I was posted in what is called the Northern Railway headquarters in Delhi. And I was called a senior mechanical engineer. And I was doing this was more like a staff job, not a line job. And I was responsible for a few things across the Northern Railway. And that is where I was, and that's where I stayed till the end of the emergency.
Hmm. So anything in particular you recall, you being a government employee, some advisory from the government, from the ministry as such, as to how services will be during that period?
Actually, no, I am not aware of any of those because I think I was not senior enough to be involved in such things. I did my usual work. The only thing that we used to talk about is that, you know, the trains are moving on time, there is discipline, and one would read in the papers about what was happening to the media, etc. But at that time, I was not, well, let me say, I was not a concerned citizen or an active citizen. I was just a government employee. And things seemed to be fine. One major recollection that I have, which has stayed with me, is that, in the government, it is very difficult to fire somebody or remove somebody from service. You have to issue a charge sheet and an inquiry. There's a whole long process which goes on for a long time. But during the emergency, that process had been put aside, and it was possible to fire somebody from permanent government employment by just recording a half-page note explaining whatever reasons there were for firing the person, and that was it. And I have to say this with, I don't know, with a certain amount of regret or whatever, that I did do that to an employee. I have forgotten who the employee was and what was the reason. But the fact remains, which stays with me, that I did remove a railway employee from service merely by recording a half-page note, which is the only thing that I actually remember very clearly.
Mm. So a couple of things. I think we'll definitely talk about this incident. But you also said all the trains were on schedule. There was a lot of discipline. How did that happen? Because this is, I think, the fourth person. So far, I've done 5 interviews, and you're the fourth person to say things were very disciplined. Everything was on time. What happened there?
I think in retrospect, people were scared. Uh, the as a matter of fact, it's a kind of a dual-edged, double-edged sword. The law and order machinery had become very, very active. I would say overactive, and there was no redressal. I mean, there was no scope for for appealing or complaining or whatever. Just like I said that you could fire a person with a half a page note and then that was the end of it. Similarly, in general public services, there was a fear of, I guess, sometimes people say, fear of God and fear of the law. Law was implemented in a kind of a special unrestrained way, and that made people very cautious, and they sort of did not cross any line. They just stuck to what was to be done. And whether the trains were actually on time, I really don't know, although I was in the railways, but I was not in an operational job. But this was the impression that was going around. And that was another phenomenon that you didn't know what was happening, because the media there was obviously no television, or maybe only Doordarshan or something, but the newspapers were kind of censored, and that, of course, that story is known widely. So one didn't know what was happening except through word of mouth, and that could also be, one never knew what you heard was true or it was not true. The expression fake news was not had not been invented by then. So one got so-called news, but one didn't know whether they were correct or not. So whether the trains are on time or not, but discipline in the sense that people, started feeling that they should follow the law or the rule. Otherwise, the consequences would be serious and difficult.
Right. And was there any talk among yourselves, among the government employees, as to what was happening around? Did you even reflect, or did you even care about what was going on, or you were just doing your 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, whatever that, as a government duty?
While we would talk, in the place where I worked, 4, 5, 6 of us would actually get together for lunch every day. We would carry our lunch from home, and therefore in the office we would sit in somebody's room and have lunch, and then chat around for 15 minutes, half an hour after lunch and over lunch. And all these things were discussed in a very general way. At least in that group of 5 or 6, I think most of them were like me. They were not unnecessarily, they were not unduly interested in social happenings or political happenings. And I suppose we were young. Young are supposed to be idealists and all that, but we thought we should do our jobs the way they are supposed to be done. And we were kind of reasonably conscious of the fact that there is something called government service conduct rules, which forbid government employees from getting into political activity or making public comments, etc., etc. So we didn't do any of that, but amongst ourselves we talked, and There were views. Most of the views I thought were ambivalent, but I don't really remember. But certainly there was talk.
Mm. And what was your personal view, though, of the emergency, the way it was imposed?
At that time, I had really no view. I was a very kind of a neutral person. I took things the way they came. I was kind of, as I said, we were young, and one was trying to do the best one can for oneself in the career of one's choice or whatever. So I didn't worry too much about what was happening. I don't remember anything having any hard feelings or approving feelings. No, I was kind of ambivalent. I think I did not like the fact that the newspapers were censored and there were some of them left their editorial space blank. And yes, there was a whole lot of kind of disapproval of the so-called family planning or the sterilization campaign. And a lot of stories used to float around that, a group of people went to a village for something and the entire male population fled, etc., etc. So there were a lot of jokes being made and sarcastic comments being made about the family planning thing. And of course, the the main person was Sanjay Gandhi, and there were all kinds of stories floating around Sanjay Gandhi about Sanjay Gandhi and his group of cronies who were kind of having a field day. So this is what it was basically.
Mm. And this person that you happened to fire, do you remember what was the conduct of that employee, or what triggered you to take that action?
No, I have. I feel bad. I have no recollection whatsoever as
Okay.
to who the person was, what was it that led to this. But at that time, I thought I was doing what was right and what needed to be done.
Mm.
Because having worked with the railways for a while till then, everybody was aware that the worst that can be done to a person is to transfer that person from position A to position B. Now, sometimes that worked. Sometimes the person would refuse to go and he would go to court, and then the thing will hang on. One didn't know for how long. And before that thing could be decided, one was transferred out of that position and went somewhere else. So the matter ended, and the next person was not so involved in that process. And over time, people would then, the matter would fall by the wayside, and things would continue the way they are. So there was a general feeling amongst at least the group that I was part of, that the disciplinary rules were very, very, not conducive to, keeping people, getting people to do what they should do, because there was a lot of leeway and legal loopholes and so on for people to uh, make excuses and get away. So from that perspective, it was, I think, I felt it was all right, and it was the thing to do. And at the same time, I also felt, removing somebody from a permanent employment is not a simple thing. And I remember the first time I did it, which was several years before that, when I was an assistant mechanical engineer. When I wrote on the file that this person should be removed from service, etc., etc., I felt very uneasy, and I felt one very uneasy for quite some time. But that was the first time. But then after that, I ended up doing it, several times, following the due process. But this was the first and the only time where it was within my power, even at that kind of junior level or whatever, that I could write a half-page note and the person would be out of his chart. So that kind of sense has remained with me. And I have often wondered whether I did the right thing or not, but I have no recollection who the person was and what did I do that for.
Right, right. So moving on to your social life or the community that you are part of, do you recall anything particular, any start memories of your social, like the social gatherings or part of the communities? Anything in particular that stood out for you at that point?
Not really, but I mean, if I were to try and recollect in retrospect, I mean, there was kind of a mixed feeling. People did not like the kind of excesses that were happening, which was certainly happening, whether there was authentic information or not. Even at that time, at least the group that I was with, we felt that some things were going wrong. But at the same time, people were not completely against it. That group of people who were sort of mostly government employees and of the same age group, I think they felt that something good was happening, but it was also accompanied by excesses and ruthlessness and cruelty. And this is the kind of difficult process. There was the fear of law was put into people's heads and hearts, of course. But at the same time, the implementation of the law was being done in a kind of a lawless way. So the law and order machinery and the censor machinery, which was all kind of ad hoc, they could do no wrong and nobody could challenge them. So the legal process was in a very strange situation. The police, etc., could do what they liked and nobody could say anything. And obviously, at that time, I did not realize or I did not know the legal process had come to a standstill, because I mean, as I learned later, much later, that the Supreme Court had even set aside the habeas corpus. And momentous things were happening, which I was not aware of at that time. So there was kind of a bit of approval and a bit of disapproval, both.
Mm. And, about 18 months later, when the emergency was lifted off, did you see things going back to how they were prior to emergency?
There was not so much different even during the emergency.
Like
I mean,
this
there
whole
was all this that
disciplinary...
I talked about, but
Right.
things kind of gradually moved back to, or I really don't know whether the much changed, except for what I have described. But at the same time, one's day-to-day life for people like me was not affected at all. And, I don't, oh yes, I remember in 77, then I actually moved on to a public sector undertaking. And we'll talk about the emergency.
Sure.
Fast forwarding was not part of the agreement.
Okay. Fair enough.
Number two, you said that my life was not like an ordinary citizen at that time. At that time, I thought I was also an ordinary citizen, although not consciously.
Right.
So I did not consider myself a kind of a privileged lot, but I had a job, and a nice job, actually very good job, which a lot of people, I would imagine, were envious of. So that way I considered myself lucky and fortunate, but I didn't consider myself to be a extraordinary or a different than any citizen. So at that time, my understanding of what a citizen is was different. And the general sense was that if we or each of us did her or his job, as efficiently and effectively as possible, we were making a contribution to the nation. And of course, one of which was that one was not corrupt in the sense one did not take bribes, one did not do all these things that are kind of commonplace. So to be honest, uh, in a way, was also considered to be a contribution to national life. And we were quite happy doing that. And the rest of it was done by people whose job it was, which subsequently, and if you say fast forward to now, which I came to realize many years ago, that politics is not meant only for politicians. And as
Your
said that
voice is breaking up a bit.
So
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, now it's good.
No, I think my internet connection is come off. Can you give me a minute to reboot?
Sure. Okay. Welcome back, Jagdeep ji. So you're talking about the role of a citizen, how the citizen, by doing, fulfilling his or her responsibilities or duties, can do a great service to the nation.
No, yes, I was saying that at that time, during the emergency and around before and after, the group that I was part of, we felt that if we did our job conscientiously and without doing anything wrong in terms of corruption, etc., we would be making, oh yes, I was at, the war is too serious a business to be left to the generals. This can be paraphrased to say that politics is too serious a business to be left only to the politicians. And citizens ought to be a very active player in politics without getting involved in the what I suppose can be called competitive electoral politics. So citizenship at that time did not mean this to me. I did not know this. So the fact that one thought one was doing what one was expected to do was sort of enough.
I think you summarized it very well. And politics is too serious a business to be left alone to the politicians.
I have said this and written this many times. So
I know.
And maybe it is not the original that I have done. Somebody else must have said it also. Yeah.
Right. And I think the second thing that you've said is being an active citizen is what is really, expected of each and every individual. And if they do their job, I think that itself will be a great service to the nation, be it emergency or without.
No, that not only those who are working in the civil services or the government or public service, every citizen as a, if I'm a school teacher, well, that again is a kind of a job. Even if I'm running my own small shop, if I do my job correctly without any, serious wrongdoing, I am doing, everybody cannot be, everybody cannot kind of take on responsibility of the nation. Everybody has to contribute her or his own bit. And that should also be recognized, I think. Yeah.
Right. Very true. Well, thank you very much, Jagdeep ji. I enjoyed this short conversation. Thank you for sharing your memories of whatever you had at that point in time. I think there's definitely a thing or two that can be learned.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but since you asked us to rewind to 2021, let me share an incident that happened not too far in the past, about 3-4 years ago. There is something called the Pathal Gadi movement.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that?
No, Jagdeep ji.
Well, a lot of people have not heard of it, but the basis of it is that in the tribal areas of India, the ownership of land is not individual.
Mm-hmm.
Like you own a piece of land and so on. The ownership is by the community. So because of that, there are special constitutional provisions in Schedule 5 of the Constitution. There are some stipulations that in tribal areas where the land ownership is by the community, sale and purchase of land requires approval of the entire community in that entire village and so on. So there are such provisions where the local citizenry or the community is given a lot more powers than elsewhere. And one of them is, this ability to transfer land and so on. So it seems this, of course, the Pathal Gadi movement started in actually long ago in Gujarat, but then it moved around the country. And 3-4 years ago, it was in Jharkhand. Now in Jharkhand, it turned out that some company was allotted a huge piece of land by the state government by kind of surreptitiously changing another local state level law. And then these tribal people realized or were informed by somebody that their land was being taken away. And under Schedule 5, it could not be done without their agreement, active approval. And then what was suggested was that the provisions of Schedule 5 be engraved on, slates of stone, and these should be put up at the entrance to the village, upright.
Right.
So there were pieces of stone, which was pathal or pathar, and gadi, because it was dug or stuck in the ground, gada hua. So this became the movement, and a lot of villages, tribal villages, did that and said that nobody can enter the village without our permission. So this led to a kind of a confrontation between the villagers and obviously the state authorities. And there were also confrontations with police with guns and the tribals with their bows and arrows, etc. And some people died and a lot of stuff happened. So anyway, I had gone to Ranchi for some purpose. And since I was in Ranchi, I requested that if I could visit some Pathalgadi villages. So they said sure, and I went to 3 such villages. In one of those villages, when we entered, we came across 2 young men who were obviously the tribal young men, and they did not appear to be educated. They were very, very shabbily kind of dressed, and they looked as if they've just sort of leading an existence which is not too much to do. So as we entered, these stones were on my right side, and these fellows were in front of me. So I asked them. I said, after some introductory words, I said, "What is this?" Pointing to those stones. So one of these young men said कि इन पे संविधान के 5वें अनुच्छेद के प्रावधान लिखे हुए हैं. I was very impressed with this Hindi, and of course, for those of your audience who do not understand Hindi, he said that these have the provisions of Schedule 5 of the Constitution engraved on them. So I was very impressed, as I said, but then I said that, I said, when did you do this? He said, last year. So I said, but the Constitution has been around for 70 years. What happened last year that made you do this? And then this young man made a statement which has stayed with me since then. And he says, 70 साल तक संविधान हमसे छुपा के रखा गया था. In English, for 70 years, the Constitution had been hidden from us. Now, this statement made so simply by this young man in this remote location has been with me as a testimony to constitutional illiteracy that is prevalent in our country. And it is amazing that, I have since then been asking a lot of people whenever I meet and I go somewhere, the level of constitutional literacy or knowledge of the Constitution is very, very poor. And, even in, let us say, when I was in school, we used to taught civics. And the civics had, this kind of parliament has 543 members in the Lok Sabha. Now, whether there are 543 members or 552 members, I am not sure whether it makes much of a difference to me as a citizen. But what matters is that as a citizen, I need to know how does one become a member of parliament? What does one do as a member of parliament? And what does the parliament do? So those things are not, that's not sort of taught, or nobody made aware of that. And there are, of course, fundamental duties in the Constitution which are neither justiciable and nor anybody knows about them. Oh, we don't know the realities of our Constitution. There is a, sorry, am I taking too long?
No. This is good. Please go on.
So there is a TEDx video that I did some time ago, several years ago, in Jaipur, in which the question that was discussed was, where does government come from? And I have asked this question across the country to all kinds of audiences, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, young, old, etc., etc. Everybody says that we elect the government. And in a span of 15 minutes, it can be explained how citizens do not elect the government. And I won't go into details. I would just suggest that whoever is interested may watch that TEDx video titled, Where Does Government Come From? And that, to me, is proof how constitutionally illiterate we are. And that is the tragedy.
Well, that's a very intriguing way to end the conversation. I think for folks, again, I'll remind you the TEDx talk Jagdeep ji just mentioned, Where Does Government Come From? Please do look it up. And I think the constitutional literacy is definitely, I'm also one of the people who have shown very little interest growing up when I was in school and did my undergrad, not knowing anything about the Constitution as such. It was only later on, as I got closer to the issues, is when I started to take interest in the Constitution. And I'm still, trying to get to know what these sections are and, try to memorize them if I can. So that literacy is still going on. That education is still going on.
No, if I may interrupt, Suresh, two things. One, as you got closer to the issues, and ironically, as you got farther from the country, number one. Number two, you don't have to memorize those sections, my friend. We need to understand and internalize those sections.
Right, right. Very true. I mean, the reason why I said need to memorize is there are some of the very fundamental constitution sections which, you know, when we're talking in public forums, it will help for us to remember those sections, to you know, put them into the context and stress the importance of those sections. And that's where my comment was, I was coming from. But you're
No,
right.
I understand, but you know, being a former teacher,
Right.
one is in the habit of correcting others. Yeah.
No, that I think very true, that we need to understand, we need to internalize that, and try to, you know, bring that into our everyday lives. I think that is what is, as that you know, that young man who you met in Jharkhand reminded you. I think that's a reminder for everybody, I think. Well, Jagdeep ji, thanks always. It's a wonderful talking to you, and you know, good luck with everything that you do. And yeah, thank you again.
And let me say, and please keep it on record, don't delete it,
Yeah, no.
that you are doing outstanding work where you are. And I think if a few more people were to start doing the kind of things you are doing sitting so far away, if people were in India were to do it, we would be in a much better condition. So please keep up the good work. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Jagdeep ji. Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.